Okay, thank you everybody for joining us for this session at the Travel Tech Show 2021. We are going around the world this week. This is the North American part of this particular element of the Travel Tech Show. And I'm delighted to be joined by three luminaries who are going to be talking through some really interesting perspectives as to some of the things that they've been seeing over the last 18 months or so, but also looking forward. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to, first of all, Amy Burr. Amy is the president for JetBlue Technology Ventures. Next to her is Dakota Smith. He's the chief strategy officer at Hopper. And last but no means least, we've got Ilan Twig, is the chief technology officer at TripActions. I don't suspect at all that any of you will have not heard of these three esteemed organizations. So thank you very much, the three of you, for joining us at Travel Tech Show 2021. Right now, so the description for this session, I always thought it's always good to repeat this, is the product and tech executives from a cross-section of the travel and tourism organizations share their successes and failures. We're going to get to those as well. And what types of products will win into the recovery and beyond. So we all know that unless you've had your head buried in the sand for the last 20 months, we have been through a rather interesting, is one word of putting it, rather kind of turbulent time that has affected our industry in so many ways, but that hasn't stopped companies perhaps using the natural pause that this last 20 months has given us to think about the products that they have and the products that they are been working on and bringing to the market, and also thinking about how they might work through product and innovation in the future based on the way that they've operated over the last 20 months. I think it's fair to say that most companies have operated in a very different way because they haven't had operations to deal with. Their customers the volume of customers has also been very low. So it has given them this kind of time to think about what they do. So let's dive in, and we'll start with you, Amy, if we can, first of all. And again, thank you for joining us, Amy. And what do you say, tech developments that are important to the market that you've seen since March 2020? Just very broadly, just kind of give us some perspective first, Amy.
I think a couple different things have really popped into the market. First of all, of course, there was a whole host of things that really, from a travel perspective, were focused on addressing the pandemic and addressing the actual crisis at hand. And there's a whole host of those things, and we can talk about them during this session, because some of those maybe aren't failures, but aren't things that will stick, right? But what we did see and what we think is that there's a couple things that came out of this that will stick for the long term and that we think are really exciting, opportunities. One of the things that I think really grew out of since March 2020 and out of the pandemic is just the adoption and the acceptance of contactless tech. I think it's been around for a really long time and everybody's been focused on, trialing certain things over time, but it's never been the thing that has been the highest priority, right? If it's figuring out how to use biometrics better for boarding or for security or for all of, for hospitality uses, those types of things were interesting, but were they the most interesting? Not sure. But, coming out of COVID, it's like, okay, these are the most interesting and the most needed right now. So that's one whole area. And there's a whole host of different contactless technology options that I think have really grown over the time and will continue to grow. But the other piece that we really have been focused on too is that, one area that everybody was really excited about before and really, considering before and has maintained and grown through the COVID crisis is sustainability. So anything to do with kind of how you make travel more sustainable, and there's a whole host of ways you can do that. I think that has only grown over time and is definitely a focus for us at JetBlue Tech Ventures. So those are probably the two biggest things that I think, we've seen since March 2020 that are going to continue to grow.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wouldn't have suspected, not based on who you are as a person, but I just, the subject of sustainability to come up so early. And perhaps we will come back to that because it is, I think we hope that the pandemic will go away eventually, but the issue of sustainability is one that we are going to be with for a long time unless we, again, to use the phrase, you take our heads out the sand a little bit. So, Dakota, if we can come to you on this, What would you say, you're involved in product development at Hopper. I mean, what would you say is the most important product development that you've made as a business since March 2020? And if for those that may not have seen or heard about it, can you give us a kind of a brief description and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, for those of you who know, like Hopper started kind of as a data company, and our mission was to add more transparency to travel. And our first data product was a price prediction where we predicted the future price of flights. Coming into 2020, we had just started working on kind of like a natural extension of that, which was a suite of data-driven risk-based products where you could do things like control pricing volatility with a product called Price Freeze. You see any price in the Hopper app that you like, you can freeze it for up to 21 days. If the price goes up further, Hopper pays the difference to the supplier. If the price drops, and we take that risk on, right? So in some ways, it actually works like a financial option. And we saw that as like a really cool extension of the price prediction. And as part of that effort, we also created a suite of insurance type products and protection products. You can imagine it was like a particularly terrible time to start introducing those products right in, mid-March 2020. So it put a lot of stress on the company overall in terms of, these products. I'm saying they were rolling out like in February and March 2020. But what we've seen since March 2020 is actually pretty impressive. So the company's been pretty heads down and handling, of course, the day-to-day issues like customer service and making sure all the disrupted travelers could get, their refunds into where they were going. But then the level of relative importance of these risk-based data products to Hopper has grown tenfold since March 2020. Like customers are, we thought it was a great risk at the time. Like when the pandemic first happened, we were like, oh, risk-based products, like everything just got disrupted. This could be really, really not great. But what actually happened was those products increased in their utility to travelers by an order of magnitude. So people started buying them because, instead of freezing a price because it's fun, it became a matter of actually, I'm not sure I can travel to that destination. I'm not sure it's safe to go or I'm allowed to go. So that was like the biggest thing that we've seen since March 2020. So the other thing, not to talk about it too much, we introduced a B2B initiative called Hopper Cloud, which is actually for distributing those data-driven ancillary products via API. And we spun up an entire business division actually at Hopper to take that on. And we're launching with our signature partner, Capital One, actually next month. So that was a pretty cool outcome as well.
Okay, and Ilan, if we can come to you, I mean, TripActions doesn't appear to have slowed down at all in terms of what we're hearing, some of the things that you've been doing. I mean, same question really that I posed to Dakota. I mean, what's been the most important either enhancement or product development that you've put into the field since we've been involved in this global crisis?
Yeah, so first, TripActions is a global travel management and expense solution. So we manage the travel programs of companies. We manage our expense solutions, and everything is integrated. We provide credit cards, and everything kind of like really works together. And what we've seen in the beginning, when this whole thing started, it was a very difficult reality because we all knew in November of 2019 and December that there is 50, 60, 70, 80,000 cases of this new disease in Wuhan, China, but we were not too concerned about it because it was so far. But then in February or January, there was 130 cases of COVID in Milano, in Italy, and then we all, oh my God, something is happening. Something really is happening. So this thing happened, and there was a very quick decline. If you remember, the CDC started to issue guidelines. And the first guideline was don't go to Iran because Iran was really infected at that point. And the recommendation was do not go to Italy, or when you come back from Italy, you need to quarantine. China was closed even before. And then 2 days later, you cannot go to Italy anymore. And but if you come back from France or Spain, you need to quarantine. And 3 days later, you cannot go to France. And then it was like, I think 4 to 6 weeks of an ever-changing reality. And I remember that we were sitting there one day, and we had travelers in Italy, and the CDC said do not go to Italy, and you need to quarantine. So we had to reach out to them, and we started to struggle to see. And this basically, at some point, we just shook our hands and said, all of our customers are struggling right now to manage this changing reality. So what if we just all the tools that we developed internally, make it part of the product? And in fact, it was a Friday. On Monday, we released the first version of what we call the Corona dashboard, that basically allowed the travel managers, the business travel managers, to opt in. And if you opt into this new functionality, we basically are connected to the CDC website. And if the CDC says Italy is in a do not go list, at that point, if you opted in, Italy will be blocked globally. So you will not be able to book a flight to Italy. But more than that is the more complicated part is you had 5 travelers that just came back yesterday from Italy. And you have travelers that are coming back today, and you have travelers that have been here for a week. These people need to quarantine for 7 days. The other need to quarantine for 13 days. And the rest that are still there must come back right now. So how do you manage this communication? If you know where they are at, if you know how their itinerary looks like, you can really automate the message. And that's what we've done. And it's not just Italy. It's Italy and Iran and France and Germany and China and then. And every day it's a new thing. You very quickly lose control. So that was the very first thing that we've done to enable our customers to manage their travel program and to manage their travelers in a very, very challenging reality that just arrived. No one had time to deal with it. And I see that the camera is losing focus. I'm trying not to move.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm Israeli, so when I talk, I move a lot. So I'll try to control myself.
It's you be as animated as you like. It's fine.
Okay.
We'll get the idea, even if you're blurring in and out. Don't worry. So, Amy, back to you if we can. I mean, how can you work with lots of startups, many of them that you've invested in. That is the premise of JetBlue Technology Ventures. I mean, how would you advise some of those companies that you work with to kind of push products forward when everything else in their own businesses and the industry itself is kind of in survival mode? Do you kind of have to inspire them to keep going, and if you've got a great product idea, just keep going with it? Or is it a balancing? I'd say, okay, we kind of also need to make sure the business doesn't go under here, but here's a really cool idea that I want you to focus on.
Yeah, that was actually a big piece of what our team spent a lot of time on. Kind of soon as business as usual shut down in March, is helping all of our portfolio companies. We've invested in 31 companies to date. Some have exited and whatnot, so not all of them are active. But we just spent a lot of time with the remaining portfolio companies to talk about how can they make it through. And some, have products that were directly impacted and really, really severely impacted. And that, those folks, it's more about battening down the hatches and, conserving cash and figuring out if there was a potential pivot of their product that could resonate at this time. It's interesting, both Ilan and Dakota talked about information. And I think that was one of the really great things to come out of COVID, is that a lot of products were developed by a lot of different companies around information for travelers. And I think that's not necessarily been as readily available for people over the last, call it whatever, 5 or 10 years. And yes, you can go on the internet and do your own research, but isn't it great when a travel company actually gives you the information you need? And I think a lot of companies have really thought that might be a way to encourage travelers to use their products over the pandemic period. And so we definitely saw a lot of companies pivoting and adding new products like that. But others were fine and had products and portfolios of products that weren't really impacted, and then it was just full steam ahead and continue to really push the envelope. One of the things we really encouraged our portfolio companies to do is take this time where you're maybe not as busy in sales and deployments to really make sure that your tech stack is perfect, and that everything is, your product is really what you want it to be. And if there's all this development that you haven't had time to do, now's the time to do it. So if you have, the time, the money, the resources to do those kinds of things, that was a really great time for those companies to do it. So, it was a lot of individual, company by company advice, either hunker down, make some changes, full speed ahead. It just depended on the product and depended on what company it was. But like I said, things like information tools were really popular, and I think will really live beyond the pandemic as well.
Okay. Ilan, business travel hasn't really come back. And, it's not a laughing matter, but it is the sector that's perhaps been hit as much as anybody else, perhaps worse, and will be the slowest to come back. So with that all in mind, when you're sitting there in April and March and June last year, and indeed throughout the intervening 18 months, and you think, we're really not seeing any volume, how do you think about product development and the things to focus on when you really don't have much going on in terms of travelers? Now, I know that, TripActions has been releasing these excellent reports showing activity is picking up, but it isn't back to what it was 2019. So how do you kind of juggle things around and prioritize with those two kind of things going on?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We are a Silicon Valley tech company, and we were the first among other, great companies here in the Valley that got hit. Because we are in the travel business, and when there's no flights, people don't travel. It's obviously a huge impact on our business. I think that 4 to 6 weeks later, all companies got impacted. It became really a global problem, except for Zoom maybe, that really found a way to ride this pandemic wave. But going back to things happen in life, and I don't know if it's me growing up in Israel. Facing a difficult reality every day that made us, things happen. There are things that you have control on and things that you don't have control on. I don't have control on the pandemic, but we definitely have a lot of control on what we do. And so one way would be to really dive into this sadness of how, why? Because we were growing, like a rocket ship, and suddenly it all stopped. With a virus, like who would have thought that could happen? So I will say there was 2 weeks where we had this mindset, and then immediately after that we responded and we went back to our roots. What made us be so successful, and what made us be so successful is building a product that delivers value to our customers. That was the one thing. It's all about the user, and so we kept focusing on that. And there was a lot of responsibility that was put on us and by our customers, and they were struggling. It's not just TripActions; all of them were struggling. So we had a huge opportunity to really think about the user. Then, what can we do to help them? And so I have to say, our business got a huge hit, but fortunately. Not too long before the pandemic, we raised a lot of money. We still are a VC-backed company, and it gave us a little bit more freedom. Obviously, we had to be responsible. We had a major layoffs, and we had a huge impact on our income. And one day we'll write a story about it, because it's really, I don't think that in history things like this happened in the past. But at the same time, we had to refocus. And we started to build things that would help our customers go through this very, very challenging time. And then we also started to think, and we thought, okay, now they can manage this difficult time. What's going to happen in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 12 and 18 months? And one of the realization was a lot of the business spend is going to shift away from travel into the other elements of expenses, home office environment, meals, reality changed. Everyone worked remotely. So with that, we actually launched a completely new product line. We call it Liquid, which manages expenses really, really well, takes the headache out of that and makes it and streamlines it, makes it very smart. It takes advantage of our platform that is all in real time. So everything is in real time. The CFO has real-time visibility into spend when it happens. much better control because you can enforce, micro policies. So if you try to use the card for something that you're not supposed to, something will happen right there, right now, et cetera, et cetera. And it actually resonated really well with our customers. They suddenly had a major set of expenses that were always there, but now they became in the center and much more. All employees had to expense stuff suddenly. And it spoke to them really, really well with the policy and the real-time nature of our platform. So this business line is actually becoming, by now, is super, super major, is growing faster than TripActions ever did. And TripActions grew really, really fast at a 25% rate month over month. And Liquid is growing much, much faster. So again, if you, just to summarize it, if you keep focusing on what you think makes you good, in our case is creating value to our customers, focusing on the users, focusing on the users, focusing on the users, following this belief, good things happen. That's how, all we always just stay sad and do nothing, but we kept, and there is a lot of excitement. There was a lot of excitement in the company around solving problems, getting the thank yous. We got a lot of thank yous, creating new products, seeing how they actually being adopted really quickly, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, I'm interested, Dakota, if we can come to you for a moment. I mean, as we know, Hopper has continued to raise money for a number of years now, very recently as well. And you referenced the insurance, the fintech element of what Hopper is. I mean, I know that would have been something that you were planning that was on the roadmap prior to everything, but it is. I don't want to call it a pivot, but people are now looking at Hopper through a different kind of lens now. And do you sense that what you've done with the fintech part of the business is bigger than perhaps you perceived it to be, just because of the way you've developed it and the way it's been used?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say at this point. Fintech has grown to comprise something like 70% of our revenues. Now, these products are all very travel related, so I don't want to, it's hard to decouple them from the underlying travel agency, which Hopper is also one. But the success of adding both customer value, like the fintech products create value propositions that give customers a meaningful and compelling reason to book with Hopper. But they also, they generate margin that is hard to come by, especially in air travel, but in other categories of travel as well. They generate meaningful margin dollars that Hopper can then use as well. So, and I think that's really coming across as well in this Hopper Cloud initiative, where Capital One. I mean, I'm sure you saw that news at the beginning of this year. They led our fundraising round at the beginning of the year, and we announced a partnership where we'll be powering the Capital One travel portal for their 40 million cardholders. They of course had their choice of whom to work with, and Expedia does exist and Priceline does exist. And the reason they're choosing to work with Hopper is actually because of these data-driven value propositions around these fintech products like Price Freeze. That's creating something that stands out in the market, and you can see that in our numbers too, which is I think one of the reasons we've been kind of leading the market recovery, at least in like under 30-year-old leisure travelers here. But we were pleasantly surprised at the results this year so far.
Okay. Before we come back to Ilan and Dakota as the kind of the tech folk within particular brands, Amy, I will go to you on this one first. I mean, from either the portfolios of the companies in the portfolio, I beg your pardon, or those elsewhere. I mean, what are some of the products that you've seen that have been tried and failed? This is perhaps where we get some people to make some startling admissions. Maybe Dakota and Ilan will have something to tell us, but your perspective first of all, please, Amy.
I'm not sure that I would say that there have been, that there's a ton of things that our portfolio, for example, have tried and failed. But what I would say is there are definitely things that, we spend a lot of time with JetBlue as our mothership. We are the corporate venture firm of JetBlue. We spent a lot of time with JetBlue at the beginning of the pandemic, for especially the first 6 months, really showcasing emerging tech that could help them kind of make their way through the pandemic. They put in place a big safety from the ground up program. And there were a lot of things that we tried that we would find and research and bring to JetBlue to trial, especially from a startup realm, that they tried and maybe they weren't the thing that was going to live forever. And, maybe it just didn't work out. It wasn't that the tech failed per se, it just maybe wasn't for them. So, an example of that would be a lot of cleaning tech, right? The very first thing that all the airlines started to look at is how do we make the planes as clean as possible? But, and generally speaking, the planes are fairly clean. Obviously the filtration systems are amazing, the HEPA filters and things like that. But cleaning was a very big focus at the beginning of the pandemic. And, for example, we spent a lot of time on how do you use electrostatic spraying to spray disinfectants? How do you use UV tech to clean the aircraft surfaces? How do you use some of those types of new technologies to really kind of move the needle? And JetBlue did a trial on UV tech that maybe wasn't perfect and wasn't for them. And so they moved on to something else. And so that's the kind of stuff that we really, kind of iterated through for the pandemic. We spent a lot of time on new testing technology and new contact tracing technology and health passports and thermal imaging and all of these things that would help very specific to the COVID crisis. And those things aren't as important anymore, and maybe weren't, adopted at a wide scale in a wide scale way because they didn't quite meet the need and weren't quite going to be something that's going to live long term. So did they fail? I wouldn't say that. I would say they didn't quite meet the needs and maybe, we've moved on. So, while we, JetBlue Tech Ventures, aren't a product company, we do spend a lot of time with JetBlue, who is a product company. And that is the kind of stuff that, they had to iterate through, as they're implementing their kind of, safety program around COVID.
Would you say, just before we move on to the two lads here, I mean, would you say there's the old phrase, isn't it, fail fast and fail often? And do you think we've been in an environment as product companies where we've been slightly less worried about risk with trying new things just because we have had an opportunity because of downtime, fewer customers, blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually one of the great things, about this kind of period of time we've gone through. Well, there's not a lot of great things about it. This was one of the things that I think was really good. Companies learned, at least in our experience and the things that we've seen, companies have learned that, you can't sit on this tech anymore, and you can't, you have to actually try these things and try them quickly and see what's going to work and move on, because your competitors are doing the same thing and they're going to get ahead of you in some of these ways. And so, and because you have this time and the amount of resources you have available who aren't doing things that, kind of they were doing before, there's opportunity to really kind of iterate through some of the opportunities out there to do new things. And so I think that was true of JetBlue. I think JetBlue spent a lot of time really trialing quickly some things that, may or may not work. But that's super valuable. And we actually spent a lot of time at JetBlue Tech Ventures helping, our partners, including JetBlue, think about the fact that sometimes you just have to trial things and you have to trial them quickly to figure out if they're going to work for you. Because if they're not, that's okay. You've learned something and try something different. So I was really encouraged to see that kind of mentality take hold a little bit through COVID, and out of necessity, of course. But you know what? Out of a crisis like this grows a new habit that I think will help corporations in the long term.
Okay, Ilan, be honest with us then. Give us a sense of some of the things that you've tried and haven't worked out as perhaps spectacularly as some of the other things that you do.
Yeah, I was. I think that like 2 years, or maybe less than 2 years, maybe 1.5 years into the journey of TripActions, when we were really, really small. The platform was much younger. We were much more naive. We tried, and we said, we're growing so fast on corporate travel. Let's just open it up for leisure travel. And so we tried leisure travel, while not really fully understanding, barely understanding corporate travel. We opened it up to leisure travel, kind of like mixing two separate DNAs. Doing all the possible mistakes, but it was the interesting part was that I think it took us a month to declare that we lost and that we know nothing about it, and to stop it. We learned a lot from this experience. We learned how much we don't know, and I think when we ended up launching leisure travel last year, we actually we've done it correctly. And this time, it definitely is becoming a real business in TripActions. It's a new business. It has its own financials. It's growing really, really well. And, it's all good. You need to do stuff. The day you stop doing stuff because you're afraid of making a mistake is the day that you're dead. You just don't know, but you're maybe dying slowly.
Okay, Dakota, some stuff that you've done that hasn't worked, but you've learned a lot from.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but we do put a lot of emphasis at Hopper of like moving fast and trying innovative ideas and getting them out there, just as soon as possible, like getting the MVP out so we can learn with real customer data. So in some ways, we're not afraid to embarrass ourselves, by putting products that aren't quite ready. And the thought there is that we're willing to put the hard work in, hopefully, to make them ready, make them effective, and that early customer data will make it clear if we have something there or not. So as part of like, if you're emphasizing moving fast and innovation internally, we have to also normalize failure, because if we overreact to like every individual product line or feature that fails, then the people who work at Hopper won't want to take any risk or chances because they'll think it's a personal risk too.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead.
So we have some examples, of course, like of things we've launched and had to withdraw from the market. We were working on a buy now, pay later, prototype where we were doing it ourselves, kind of middle of last year that, it was getting some traction, some signal, but ultimately we withdrew that because, we just didn't think we quite had something that was adding enough value to our customers. So that's one example off the top of my head.
Okay, we'll stick with you if we can then, Dakota. We've got about 5 minutes here, but I'm always interested in culture within companies. And I think product development and culture are often they're not kind of put together. You don't really hear a lot about the culture around how we're going to think about new technology and things like that. So Dakota, I mean, how perhaps has the culture changed within the product development part of Hopper over the last 18 months? And perhaps more importantly, if we look forward, what do you think has changed that's actually going to remain with the way that you think about developing new products and services?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we think about culture a lot, and that's actually one of the things that I probably think about the most is like trying to like intentionally craft the culture that fosters the type of innovation and risk taking that we want. But that also creates like a common sense of purpose now that everyone is remote, which is of course a difficult challenge. I think Hopper has actually increased its size of our company by 100% in the last 12 months. So that means 50% of the company has been a Hopper for less than 12 months, and they've all onboarded remotely and, personally, like have most likely not really met each other. So that creates like a challenge. So we were starting to work on this in 2019, and I would say 2020 really brought it home to why it matters. So we reorganized our product development group to go from a horizontal matrix layer where there's like an engineering team, data science team, product team. Each one has a head of product, head of data science, head of engineering. And instead, we actually subdivided the groups into these vertical cross-discipline, multifunctional teams that are working backwards each from a business objective or a customer objective. So I know I mentioned that product a lot, but Price Freeze, for example, is one team. These teams are about 8 to 12 persons, and it includes engineering, data science, product, all rolling up into one leader of Price Freeze, quote unquote. So we've been trying to create like this smaller startup feel of a smaller teams, 8 to 12 person teams, as we scale up as an organization to avoid slowing down from that, almost natural thing that happens as companies scale in size, which is it becomes like harder to move fast and take risks because there's approval layers and there's, people that you don't know who actually need to sign off. Like you don't know the decision makers personally. Whereas in our model, like you absolutely do, because if you're on a team, there's maximum like 15 to 20 people on this team. So you definitely know the decision maker personally.
Right. And just to clarify, that's a model that you've introduced over the last 18 months, is it? That change in the structure?
Yeah.
Interesting. So has the culture and the structure within TripActions altered as a result of the way you kind of organize yourselves?
So for us, it was, as I said, when the crisis hit us, there was a moment of confusion. And very quickly, we realized that the solution, the path forward is to stick to what got us to this point in time with a lot of success, and it's the focus on the user. I think this religiously sticking to our core values, and the number one value is focus on the user, really helped us through a lot of crises in the history of TripActions in the journey, as well as in this crisis, which the difference between this crisis and other crises is obviously the magnitude and the devastation that a lot of people around the world experienced, but also the fact that all of our customers went through this crisis. It wasn't just a TripActions specific one. So I think that sticking to that, I think, it makes the culture, it really reinforces the culture. I do want to say that during COVID, we actually grew a lot, which is surprising, and we can maybe talk about it at some other time, but we pretty much in the first 9 to 11 months since March from March to January, February of the year after, we pretty much doubled our customer base, which is very, very surprising. And we also gained the customers of a different size, like Heineken and Adobe, big enterprise organizations, which definitely started to affect the culture because those customers expect a certain stuff, right? Customers of this size. So what we've done, we actually did drive some organizational change to create space for, while we maintain our path of, stability and predictability for our customers, so they know what's going to happen when. We also created space for the stuff that we grew up on and how to make sure that it works well together with no conflicts, and how this team does not really hurt the other team, and how we keep pushing, innovation through the company beyond just the regular innovation, the new stuff, the crazy things. And that's something that definitely has changed in the last few months.
That's interesting. So we gave you the first word, Amy, and we're going to give you the last word for this. So no pressure to send us off with something very profound, but more seriously, I mean, it's excuse me. You see a lot of startups come through the portfolio, as well as I imagine you get pitch documents from 100 more than are on the portfolio very regularly. But I mean, what would you say are some of the startups that you think are doing interesting things now, whether they are COVID related products or not, that you think it's just worth all of us? There's people tuning in from North America, Europe, and Asia to this session. So just kind of send us on our merry way with some of the kind of exciting things from a product perspective that you think are worth noting.
Well, I'll give you two little examples, or two kind of buckets. So one, we talk about kind of pivoting and creating new products kind of through this crisis period. One of our portfolio companies is a company called Miles, and they're a platform that reward users for commuting and travel and things like that. And they were one of the first that actually during, all of a sudden all of traveling, right, is on lockdown, and nobody's doing all the things that earn them rewards through Miles, a normal way. So they quickly pivoted and created like a stay-at-home category that you get credit for, and socially distanced modes of transportation that you get more credit for than you would your normal commute, and things like that. So we really, when we look at companies that have done this successfully, that's an example of one in our portfolio that we were really excited about how they looked at it and how they could figure out how to pivot their product. But over the last year, I mean, we really have just seen so many really cool companies come out, and we're really excited about investments that we can do. We've done a number of investments this year into some neat companies. Two that come to mind: we just invested in a company called Universal Hydrogen, which is thinking about how to use hydrogen as a propulsion method for aircraft or cargo ships or whatever it might, or cars or whatever it might be. But they're thinking about how do you take hydrogen and plug it in to that transportation method. And so, that's the type of stuff in sustainability that we think will really, be really interesting for this industry over time. Another really cool company we invested in is Lacuna, and they're thinking about how to manage urban mobility. How do you manage all the scooters and the bikes and the, rideshare and all of those types of things as a city, as a municipality, or as an airport? How do you manage that flow? They may also be integral in how you manage urban air mobility, which is a big space that we love, being investors in Joby Aviation from the very beginning. So, those are some of the things that we've been looking at and that we've invested in this year. There's a ton of really cool sustainability companies we're looking at. I just think there's so much opportunity right now. And, we're excited about this, upcoming year and beyond of things that we can participate in, invest in, partner with, all of those things.
I said you were going to get the last word, but something that you said there has made me think we should check with our other two panelists here, and it's back to the sustainability question. And I wonder, within your product development pipeline, and I'm not asking you to give us the secrets to where the crown jewels are in TripActions and Hopper, but are you thinking about product development with what Amy is talking about, which is one eye on sustainability? Because as we said at the beginning, it is the problem that isn't going to go away. So first of all, briefly, if you can, Ilan.
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely yes. We've, during COVID, I don't remember exactly when, but we've developed, we basically create full visibility into your carbon consumption.
Right.
On the individual level, so you can see the flight that you book, how much that's going to cost or impact the environment.
Yeah.
You can then choose to offset it. We also enable the company to aggregate all of this data and see what their carbon impact is and allow them to do something about it. This is not even step one in the right direction, I would say, but it's our customers love it. It creates the visibility. And there is a difference if you fly business or you fly economy. Now there is a lot of things to start to think about. It's all about visibility. Like you put it in front of you, and now you can start making decisions and think about it. And definitely there's more to come around that.
Okay, Dakota, quickly on the sustainability as part of your product mix or your ideas.
The first thing that we've done is we introduced a program called Hopper Trees at the beginning of the year, where we're partnering with a nonprofit to plant trees on behalf of our customers for every trip that happens in the app. So it's not voluntary. The customer doesn't have to contribute money. Hopper is actually taking part of our corporate profit on the booking and paying to this nonprofit and working with them. We've planted 10 million trees so far this year. So we're planting a lot of trees actually per booking. It's pretty exciting. And then going forward, I think, how can we do more, right? COVID was a huge temporal crisis for travel, hopefully. Sustainability, climate change will be, the generational crisis for travel. And if we want to travel like we are and have been, for the rest of this century, which I would love to do personally. I think travel is a very uplifting category and has changed a lot of people's lives for the better. We all need to be taking responsibility as an industry for what can we do to ensure that, the next generation can travel as frequently as we've all been able to enjoy, for the last 30 or 40 years.
Okay. Dakota is sending us on our merry way with something very profound. So he beat you to it, Amy. But anyway, I think the subject of sustainability and product development is an entire session all on its own right, and maybe we can revisit this another time. But thank you very much to Amy Burr, to Dakota Smith, and to Ilan Twigg. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining in the Travel Tech Show 2021. Thanks a lot.